Have you ever wondered just how much of your personal information is actually out there? How much still remains long after you log offline? Did you know every time you click agree when using a smartphone app, accept cookies on a website, type in online search, send messages on systems and platforms that you think otherwise would be private, you're leaving behind a permanent trail, a digital footprint. It increases your personal risk as well as the risk to your organization's brand. Today we have in the studio Kurt Long, CEO of Bunker and an expert with experience helping initiatives like the NASA space shuttle, the Hubble telescope, and much more. This is his story on the newest ways to take control over data privacy. And now the show. Come join us as we go behind the scenes of today's most notorious cybercrime. Every time we get online, we enter their world. So we provide true storytelling to raise awareness, interviewing global leaders making an impact and improving our world. Translating cybersecurity into everyday language that's practical and easy to understand. We appreciate you making this an award-winning podcast by downloading our episodes on Apple and Spotify and subscribing to our YouTube channel. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and now the show. All right, well, welcome, Kurt. We appreciate you being on and joining us.
Thank you, David.
Yeah. So,
thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, we're excited. So a little bit of background for anybody that may not know you. We don't have to go into detail. We've explored your origin story on a prior episode that'll be linked in the show notes. But share with everybody kind of how you got started in technology and ultimately came to work at NASA and work on the things like the Hubble telescope and other very cool initiatives that are much smarter and more technical than things that most of us see on a regular basis.
No, I watched the missions of the Apollo missions when I was really young in Florida. I grew up in Florida and could see literally the takeoffs and the launches, and then a few days later you'd see the astronauts on television, and that was very inspiring. And ultimately I wound up working at this was directed, it didn't just happen by happen chance, but worked very hard to wind up being in the real-time space shuttle launch data bank at Kennedy Space Center, and was part of a few dozen launches, including Hubble Space Telescope. Left somewhere in the 90s and wound up being an information security entrepreneur, and have been involved in that for about 30 years of strictly privacy and information security. Built several businesses, sold them, and somewhere around protected healthcare systems with around 250 million patient records and trillions of dollars of assets within banks, wealth management firms, trading companies. So in the last 20 years, always kind of on the highest standard of protecting information.
That's just phenomenal. Yeah, we explored a lot of your recent accomplishments in the last episode, and it's really remarkable how somebody that has the ideas, has the experience, has the good cause behind them can actually make an impact like you have. And so we thank you for kind of all that you've done, especially in healthcare and the financial industry.
Yes.
I mean,
that's where the most sensitive data is. That's where the bad guys.
It really is. I mean, it's remarkable how cybercrime has just advanced in their leveraging of AI, everything from the code that they're able to create, undetectability, get into systems, the amount that it's just been funded, and the amount of revenue that cybercrime and ransomware gangs and financial crime gangs have created and built up in the past few years. I'm sure before we get into some of the topics that we had wanted to discuss, I wanted to just to get your take, because you see the news, obviously. Um, Law enforcement has had some big wins in the last few months against some of the ransomware gangs and some of the cybercrime gangs. What's your take on that? It's pretty exciting, isn't it?
I mean, you have field level intelligence analysts doing an incredible job of infiltrating the gangs. I know them, some of them personally, and they're very proud of the work that they do, and they make a lot of personal sacrifices to be trusted by people that are tough to earn the trust. So a lot of those wins just come down from field level intelligence analysts infiltrating the organizations and putting those people in a position to be compromised. And it takes a long time, and they make a lot of personal sacrifice. Um, at a more macro level, something I hope we can talk about today is global governments, including the United States and European Union particularly, are putting their citizens at great risk through non-enforcement of laws and underreporting of crimes. So while the field level practitioners are phenomenally dedicated and very, very skilled, our political class is putting all of us at risk, and there's a blurring of lines now between physical crime and cyber crime and governmental enforcement of laws.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see that across so many platforms and at various levels. So let's jump right in there. Um, what are some of the samples or examples that you can give that are showing that, especially in the U.S. and in the EU?
Yeah, I mean, I travel a lot. We travel a lot internationally, and you really can't. The one point I want to make up front is that you really can't get good data by just reading the headlines and reading the media. Either direction. If you're in the EU or UK and you're reading American headlines, US headlines, probably not getting the real story, and then vice versa. You read the headlines there, you go to there on the ground, you talk to people. So I was just in Prague, a country we had not visited, Czech Republic,
Mm-hmm.
and had a great visit there. And the driver is driving us back to the airport. And I realized that he had lived in the Czech Republic through the Warsaw Pact, and while the USSR still had a big influence. And he told the story of using the phone, that his family used the phone. And when they did, they always
Cell
knew
phone or
somebody,
landline? I didn't mean to
landline or
interrupt
cell
you.
phone, didn't even
Yep.
matter. Like
Right.
they surveilled. And he said that everyone knew that every conversation was listened to, and that if you said things that were disparaging of the party, that your kids would be taken out of school, that you would lose your job, you'd be not allowed to travel. And that over time reduced down to what they just call the red phone, so that you had to be a red card carrying party member in order to use the phone at all. And if you weren't that, you kind of became a non-person, and that they turned everyone against each other. They would try to get neighbors to tell on neighbors, so that
Mm-hmm. They create a society and a culture of
yeah,
fear. Like it's a form of indoctrination, right? Like they get compliance by getting everybody to kind of rat on each other.
yeah. Then they don't trust each other. You don't even trust family members. And he went on to that is literally what he said. I wouldn't trust my friends. I could barely trust family members. We didn't talk
So
to one another.
people in the United
Very,
States can't even relate to that though, because they
we're
think
getting
that's
there.
something for
We're getting there.
spy. I know. I mean that's what we're going to talk about. But I mean,
Yeah,
people like they think that's something from the McCarthy era, or something from back in the day, or it's something that they see in movies. right? It's not
Yeah.
something that
So
people that are in their 30s and 40s have really grown up with. I mean, you have to realize, right? Like people below, what is it, 35 or so in age, like the USSR wasn't even around when they were kids, right?
yeah,
Like
so we talked
they
about
didn't
that.
grow up like that, like I did and like you did.
Yeah. So conversation continued. And I said, well, what is your free? He said the '90s were the most amazing time for everyone in that Eastern Bloc. He said it was
Mhm.
just incredible, the freedoms that came with it.
Right after
And
the
I said,
wall
well,
came
what
down.
about today?
Yeah.
And he said, well, today I feel like censorship is coming back,
Mm.
surveillance is coming back. And I said, really? Tell me about that. And his comments were that crimes are not reported, that they're censored, if you will, online. They're never published in the media. And I said, what do you mean specifically? What do you mean by that? How do you say they're? Well, he said that if it's immigrant crime, it will never be reported. So on the trains in Germany, on the train system throughout that region, Austria, Germany, Poland, and the Czech, uh, we will never report on immigrant crimes, and that's
Why is
being
that?
censored.
Like, why do you think that is? Why do you think, if assuming that what he's saying is true, why do
Yeah.
you think
So I think what
that
you
is?
see globally across the EU and across the United States is there's generally a huge movement for immigration, and I'll just call it uncontrolled immigration. I don't know what other word is how you're supposed to refer to it, but it's uncontrolled immigration. And so if I'm on the ground, every country I'm on the ground in Europe, there's a backdrop of the immigration question. And so, for example, in Britain, and this is all what I'm about to. This was a personal story I just told you now, and
Yeah, of
that's within
course.
the last weeks, like, and
Yep.
literally that was 2 weeks ago, whatever it was.
Yep.
These are headlines right now, and you can do your own research. Like in Britain, they're refusing to publish statistics on who's committing the crimes, and the people are getting some people are getting upset, and you can look at that. In Denmark, they did report crimes by country born, and the immigrants were 40 times more likely to commit a serious crime than a Danish born person. And so if you kind of just look at general policies as a general statement, by every indication I have, both in the US and the EU, there is a political sentiment amongst the political class to encourage broad scale immigration. And then those same parties are suppressing the crime statistics that would reveal that the policies are endangering the citizens. And that's a pretty obvious theme to research and recognize.
Yeah, that seems fairly well documented. Just cursory research will show people that. Here's my question: like,
Mhm.
what is the benefit to political leaders, of whichever party? But what is the benefit to them to have uncontrolled immigration? Do they
Yeah.
get more votes generally because the new immigrants tend to be aligned to them politically?
I think we all have our opinions. I'm a cybersecurity and privacy expert.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, I know a bit about fraud. I can make observations, and I don't know, David. In other words, your speculation or the audience's speculation is as good as mine,
Okay.
which is something like, for some reason, they view it as an accumulation of power. Um,
Right.
and it by every indication, it looks like central governments in the U.S. and central governments in Europe are in power accumulation mode. And so I want to point something out. The Long family, just committed $1 million to the University of Florida Hamilton Center, um, which is creating the largest department of Western civilization studies in the world. And the thing that tipped it over for us is what's civil discourse, that the president of the university, Ben Sass, is saying that, and I have every reason to believe that they're going to teach all 60,000 students, it's a big university,
Right.
how to speak to one another without argument, without physical violence.
Exactly. Without
Could Dave,
contempt, right? Just
without
to
contempt?
wreck.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's really important. You
yeah.
know that's
And I'll
so
tie it in
important.
just a second. Go ahead,
Yeah.
but I'll tie this together in just a second.
No, please do. Go ahead.
Oh, I didn't mean to. I don't want to
No,
interrupt.
I
Okay,
think that's
so
remarkable what you guys are doing. That's
and
really
we're
noble.
making a similar commitment with a firm in Denmark that's doing these kinds of things on a global scale. A firm called Voluntas, fantastic people, and we're also working in war-torn countries. They are, and I'm helping fund it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, meaning rights of people. So why is Western civilization tied into crime? What I came to believe deeply is that by the time you get to the U.S. Constitution, we've learned a lot of lessons about civilization, and one of them might be the way that, say, ancient Greeks and the third, fourth century people wrote. They wrote. Socrates and Plato wrote in kind of this dialogue style, and people like
Correct.
Boethius wrote in a dialogue where they were arguing. They were literally holding arguments that were civil, and that is kind of the lowest level foundation of our civilization, is that we can talk to each other without resorting to violence, or without me deciding that we need to get rid of you. Today that get rid of you is probably more canceling online. Back then it might have been physical. And
Right.
then if we progress through, say, let's just go through England, it's really well documented that the kings um, would go into a political adversary's home, and without a warrant, famously, and they managed to find something bad that you were doing. And if they didn't find something bad you were doing, well, then they would plant something.
Right.
And so that the king's men, if you will, were weaponized against political adversaries. So when our constitutional framers put together the Fourth Amendment, famously, it was a protection from warrantless search. And then
Exactly.
on the other side of that,
There was checks and balances,
that's
because
right.
otherwise it's uncontrolled power, right? Like
I would
otherwise,
call it almost anarchy. We
correct.
devolve into kind of anarchy.
Right.
And that's where we are. We're teetering on that now. And so one of the tie back in the Western Civ thing, before we throw all that out, say, oh, they didn't know any. We should probably at least understand it, and maybe teach each other to talk well, and at least recognize that, like, our Bill of Rights probably has things in there that we should be very careful of throwing out. So if you were to tie all these things together, it's what we're devolving into online is you've got kind of this anarchy online because of the anonymity and end-to-end encryption, and the location of businesses in countries that can't be challenged by central powers. And that allows for kind of this anarchy online that criminals participate in. There's no surveillance whatsoever, if you will. And what has this done to the politicians? Well, it's just made them ever more aspirational in their surveillance. Like, they get more aggressive.
Right.
So when we look at FISA 702, which just got renewed in late April, there was a bill to make it required that there had to be a warrant in order that you be surveilled. Well, that got voted down in a tie vote, and the Speaker of the House cast the deciding vote. I believe that's correct. I know it was a tie vote. I believe that was the Speaker of the House. And he made it where it's a 2-year extension of FISA, of the ability to surveil, as opposed to 5-year. But nonetheless, this spans political parties. And so now there's even some expansions of FISA. And so you've got this incredible dynamic of government overreaching into surveillance, and then tech entrepreneurs responding by getting above the law and outside the law. And it's kind of a worst of both worlds. It's deep surveillance countered by almost like anarchy. And that's all because we've thrown out the wisdom of some of these hard-earned lessons like the Fourth Amendment. So I know that was a lot to go through. But
No, let's
through
break
it, I
this
did.
down. No, that was
Yeah.
really good. So it's your own personal assessment of
That's right.
of what is going on, but I will tell you, it seems, you're not alone. Let's just say that it seems like there's a lot of people kind of feeling this way. For listeners,
Yes.
let's explain to them, what is FISA 702?
So FISA 7
high level, right?
Yeah. So most of this started post 2001.
After
You had
9/11.
After 9/11.
Correct.
And that's why it's always tempting to point at one political party and say, oh, it's the Dems or it's the Republicans. But really, this thing spans all.
It spans. Both. It does.
So it started with the Patriot Act, which at the time probably felt really proper to a lot of us people who live in the U.S. And it gave the government more surveillance powers to surveil for terroristic activities, specifically around people who are not domiciled in the U.S. And then if they came to the U.S. or they communicated outside the U.S., that opened the surveillance net up. And over time, meaning over a decade, they wound down the Patriot Act, but they really spun up the powers of Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act 702, which in effect replicates the powers of the Patriot Act. And so that the basic idea is that the government does not need a warrant to surveil your communications if you are communicating with someone outside the US. And then that gets all spun around and it's not transparent, which is the problem, to say, well, if you're communicating someone outside the US and they get entangled and you get entangled with people that are in the US in those communications, that it broadens the net. So I would assert that it is not exactly clear where the powers of surveillance start. Well, we know they at least start when you're communicating outside the US, but they seem like they do not stop. They seem like they can twist that around to surveil all of us. And there's a great deal of lack of transparency, including the voting down of a warrant requirement, which is the most fundamental constitutional, one of the more fundamental things we have as domiciled
because
in the U.S.
In the United States, you have the right of not having warrantless searches.
Yeah, the king's men, if you will, the government can't come kick your door down and say, "I know you're doing something wrong,"
right.
and start looking around.
Find it,
we're going to find it. And then if the government gets corrupt enough, which I argue that if you think that this stuff's okay, you're just one presidential change away from thinking it's not. So if you like Biden, you're not afraid today. Well, wait till Trump gets in office and see if you fear, or if you like Trump and you're not afraid, well, wait till a Democrat gets voted in. These are things that cut across parties that we all have to learn to stand up for.
Right. Oh, and it's not just one. It's not just the executive leader. Like this is a systemic issue. Would you think so? Rather than this is where the executive leader.
It's absolutely not just the executive leader. And right now, I would say that in the past, Democrats have always tilted toward privacy rights. So I was favorable from my own self-interest, because I was in the privacy business, to say, well, the Dems are going to stick up for privacy. That's probably a good thing. Today, the Dems are probably leading a little bit away from privacy and a little more towards surveillance as a general. But here it is. I just saw an article online that the Republicans are kind of split into two groups, and that they're pitted against one another, and that they're going to use 702 against one another to control a central vote. So it goes up and down the stack, David, not just, and I wouldn't stop it just. It's once you weaponize this stuff, it's dangerous.
Right, exactly. And this could be the result of a lot of special interests in funding, right? Like you have certain Republicans that are funded by certain, tech groups in favor of privacy, then they're going to vote a certain way. Other
A
groups,
DoD contractor. I mean, if you're
right?
funded by a
Exactly.
DoD contractor, you're
Yeah.
funded by a pharmaceutical. You pick it.
Right.
These things are all interrelated,
Yeah.
and I hate to sound like the old guy yelling at the sky,
It's
but
okay.
I'm
Yeah.
okay to do that.
Right.
If I get accused of that, fine. But we need to revert back a bit. We need to revert back to government is actually for the people, representing our interest,
Yeah.
and bring back a balance of the constitutional framework.
We have a lot of guests on here that are former FBI,
Mm,
Secret Service,
mm,
and they're like, yeah, people have to stop believing in the phrase like we're from the government, we're here to help you.
yeah.
Like there's a lot of good intent, but in the execution, there's a lot. It's the system is really broken.
Yeah, let me
So,
give you one more data point just
oh
to,
yeah,
and we can go wherever you want, David, but let me give you one
no,
more
it's
data
good.
point. Like if you look at the uniform FBI crime report
Hmm.
statistics, we're hearing people out there going, hey, crime's at all-time low. And you're like, how that doesn't match my intuitive view of the world. What's going on? Well, it turns out 33% of the cities in the United States, including LA and New York, are not reporting.
Right.
They're withholding statistics. Um, and
So if
just
you
to
take
tie.
Chicago, LA, New York out
Now,
of the
Chicago
mix,
was in there, David.
crime's
To its
down.
credit, crime's
Oh,
down.
Chicago was in there. Oh,
They
good for my
were,
alma
but
mater.
Tampa, where
That's
I
good.
live in Florida,
Yeah.
Tampa was either late in reporting or had not reported, and that's a big city. So
But it's interesting,
again,
here's a real life example.
yes,
There's apps that people can monitor their local safety or to see what law enforcement is doing. There's like the citizens apps
hmm
and things like that where you can see, oh, there's a break in over here, or there's an emergency over here. There's a fire. It's a good way of being abreast of storms as well as
hmm
criminal activity. But when people and I've spoken to people all over the country, there's various jurisdictions that don't report into that app. And so you
got it.
would see, so you see all this and you're like, look at all this activity on the south side. Yeah, but the north side suburbs aren't reporting anything.
Yes,
There's no activity for
yes,
3 years there. I'm like, okay, well, don't tell me it's not happening. They're just
yes,
not reporting because it's bad PR, right?
yes,
Like they don't like people may not want to, uh, go to our local boutiques, etc. If they actually know how dangerous it could be, right?
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
it's
then in other
ridiculous.
regions like California, Proposition 47, I passed in 2014, and it, in a sense, decriminalized certain kinds of crimes,
Hmm.
nonviolent crimes for possession
Right,
of drugs, as well
right.
as stolen goods, which under $950 turned them into misdemeanors. And so, in a sense, we've legalized some what used to be crimes, so those also don't get reported. And what I can say is I've traveled to over 50 countries. I don't know how many cities, and the only place I've ever been robbed is San Francisco.
It
Um,
was interesting. We recently interviewed somebody that was just out at RSA,
mhm,
and they've been to RSA in San Francisco
mhm,
numerous times, and they
mhm.
said it has changed. It was
Is that right?
they were really afraid for themselves, and this is their own personal perception. Don't know what it's like there right now today. The problem is, I think, is without the reporting of it, nobody really knows, right? But
That's
the
right.
sense is, there's a feeling of not being safe, and that's a concern.
Yeah, so I would say the overall theme here that I'm getting at is we have I'm just going to call them the political class of people,
Mhm.
David, and you could refine that wherever you want. It's
Makes
definitely
sense.
not just the president. It's not one
No,
party. It's the
no.
political class. For whatever reason, they have these agendas, and let's just call it less controlled immigration as an example agenda, and they're going to run those, and then apparently we're going to not report crimes. We're going to legalize what used to be crimes, and then instead of like having directed law enforcement to say, I have reason to believe that Kurt or David is engaging in crime, we are just going to surveil you, and you show me the man and I'll show you the crime. As I believe it was Stalin who famously said. And the result is like the tech entrepreneurs are reacting by creating products and services that remove their users completely from law enforcement, and then you wind up with more crime. And we've got to restore some kind of balance and order back to a more centrist place.
Exactly. And let's talk about some of those platforms. Platforms like Telegram, Signal, things like that, right?
Yes.
So walk us through what are those platforms and how are they? I mean, most of our listeners have heard of them, but they may or may not have used them. So I know that Telegram is used quite regularly by cybercrime. Like there's thousands of reports of it, and I know that law enforcement is monitoring a lot of it. There've been some significant arrests arising out of conversations that they see on Telegram, which the people speaking kind of thought were private, but they weren't.
Yes. So that would be examples of where, you'd have intelligence agents getting into groups that the criminals think are private groups, but they're in fact infiltrated by intelligence analysts. But the core, say around Telegram, is the encryption, where they famously resist cooperating, and probably resist cooperating with law enforcement governments is the right way to phrase that. And
what that means is if law enforcement issues a subpoena to them, they refuse to turn over.
As a general statement, I'm sure there's exceptions to that, but as a general statement, and then they relocated the business to the UAE. And interestingly, the founder of Telegram was also robbed in San Francisco, and claims that's the only place he's ever been robbed as well.
But I don't want to get a bunch of letters from San Francisco. It's a glorious place. Like, there's a lot of culture there. It's fantastic. Don't get us wrong. We just want it to be accurately reflected in the crime statistics. That's all we're saying, right?
No, I think I'm going beyond that.
You're going beyond that. Well,
no, I am, because San Francisco.
The official view of the show is it's a great place. So.
Yeah, my opinion is I've been traveling to San Francisco since 1985. I considered it my favorite city in the world, even beyond the city that I grew up in Florida. And I think San Francisco was amazing. It's been amazing to the foundation of this country, but I think the policies that the political class have put in place there have not served law-abiding citizens and people who are industrious. I don't think it's served them well, and I think it's reflected. In the city today, and I think that there's every reason to believe that the city can recover with the modest regaining of rebalance. It's always been a great place and will be in the future, but I believe it has to regain its balance. That's my opinion.
Absolutely.
Yep. Hey, look, you could pick one city in the world to live. That's it, but I'd want law and order there. So in any case, we wind up with this underreporting of crime, and it becomes ubiquitous, and we lose ground. And we're on Telegram.
An interesting correlation. What you're making is, okay, whatever city, whatever state, whatever country, even, there's an underreporting of crime for various reasons. We don't know what, but we can surmise or speculate.
Yes.
But because of that, the technology industry is responding, and has been responding for years, by creating ways around it.
Yes.
Right? Because there's underreporting of crime, or because there's various challenges because the government can't employ 1 million intelligence analysts to infiltrate everywhere, right?
Yes.
They have sought through the laws to be able to have warrantless surveillance.
Yes.
And then from there, the tech industry is responding, and they're saying, well, then we're creating platforms which can be encrypted and can be private.
And will not cooperate with
cybercrime elements are starting to leverage those platforms. Because
They have been for at least a
right,
decade, and it's
exactly.
expanding rapidly.
Right. Well, I mean,
Yep.
it's how it started with, before, like originally there was Brett Johnson and the
Mhm.
Shadow Crew and
Yes.
that aspect, and then the dark web and the Tor browser and all the Onion
Mhm.
URLs kind of came up, but now there's all these messaging apps like Telegram and Signal. Well,
Matrix,
yeah,
Tox. Yeah.
Matrix, yep, Tox, right. and
Yes.
and and Tox we talk about all the time, because if you get attacked by ransomware, you get a note that says, come talk to us on a Tox channel, and people are like, we don't, what, like they've never heard of the Tor browser. They, like, business owners, right, they're not
Yes.
necessarily technical, but all of a sudden they have to like download the Tor browser, set up all these other systems, maybe Tails, to get on there, and then they've got to go and have a Tox channel communication, which is apparently not public. So
Yes.
it's where cybercrime lives, and it's where, when people think of the dark web and the shadows of it, I mean, it's really very similar and analogous to organized crime back in the 50s and 60s, which would just go and talk. I mean,
Hmm.
we've all seen them. We've all know the real stories where they have to talk and hide their lips. They have to go talk in public. They don't use the phones because they just find a place to have and to conduct business away from surveillance. And that's what's
Yes,
happening online.
it is.
Yeah.
Except it scales really, really well.
Oh yeah, it's
The
happening
scale of
at
it is vast.
10x, 100x
You
times.
know,
Right.
so the one thing that gets a little messy in here is, as I go through these things, and we talk about these things, is what are people supposed to do? And
Right.
it's I think we all have to play some role in bringing back accountability and balance to society. So there's a couple things. As a person who's been involved in privacy for at least 20 years, um, we've heard famously from people that just get over it, privacy's gone, and accept that you're going to be surveilled. I think this is one of the most, I don't know what word to use. I hate to say naive because it makes it sound to the listener that they're naive, but it's nefarious. This privacy
Mm-hmm.
compromise is absolutely nefarious because you don't feel it, you can't see it. It's tough to attribute what you see in the world happening. But as we watch this play out, and you speak to people, say from Czechoslovakia under the USSR, when you lose your privacy, it really does consistently lead to governmental political class abuse, a loss of not just human rights, but the value of humans, and to some extent anarchy, because everyone goes and hides from it in the dark, if you will, and you wind up with a criminal side of the world, and a surveilled side of the world, and a loss of rights. So if there was just one takeaway, it would be, I really, really wish the audience would take their privacy rights seriously. I'm not saying to go protest Facebook or something, but
No, but
watch the government,
yep.
stand up to this, and just push back legally. We don't need to be part of the problem, but push back legally in every way you can. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and that's not misaligned with the messaging that other guests have had and that we've promoted, and that is, take your, like, Americans in general have not been valuing their personal privacy. They just
Yes,
haven't. Like, as a culture, we haven't. Like,
you're right.
you talk to people over in other countries and they consider it a fundamental human right, because
Yes,
I believe the harm that happens when it leads to abuse has happened more recently over there to them. And because of
yes,
that, right? I mean, I think that's a
yes.
fair assessment.
No, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
It's in the case of the Prague driver. He was in his 40s, so it's in living memory, right? It's in
Right.
living memory for them. And David, one thing I would say, that if you want to take an action, how do you take action? Well, we all got addicted to the free app. The free app is part of this, where
We
it's
talk
like,
about that all
man,
the time. When
I
when there's
use
an app
maps.
that's free, you're the product,
Yes, and like
right?
and for years you're like, well, I still went along with it, and the more and more I saw it play out, I'm like, you know what? it's worth paying a modest amount of money to
Right.
get a really valuable app, where my sovereignty is protected. And that's what the bunker tie-in is there. It's
Right.
like we
Yep.
try to make it a modest amount of money, for people to use,
Oh, it's
and
very
we really do
affordable.
protect their privacy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean it's and we'll have links to Bunker. I mean it's extremely affordable and the levels of privacy are just unmatched. It's
Hmm.
it's it's absolutely fantastic. Um, well, and there's also what's your opinion? I wanted to ask you about this because we didn't talk about it last time, but and I'm not one that is in favor of more regulation or more laws because again, I mean, we just, the people that I talk to and in my personal experience, my own personal opinion, not the opinion of my employer. None of these opinions are opinions of my employers, everybody. But, but look, like, data brokers,
Hmm.
like like there's very little regulation about data brokers. And
Yeah.
there's so much, like, they take so much data and sell it to so many
Yeah.
organizations that you have no idea when you're
It's true.
accepting cookies and you're signing up for these free apps, you're answering these questions, these security things, you're giving them all this stuff about you, and it gets sold all over the place and many of them are nefarious and you are subject to that.
Yeah, David, I was ready to give a little speech about how we should have fewer laws, but enforce the ones we do have. And then you did the data broker thing, which is really complicated. You're right.
It
In the
is
case
complicated.
and the thing I would add, I don't have anything to add what you said about that, other than they also don't have breach reporting laws. So
No,
when they
exactly.
aggregate a ton of data, not only are they selling your data, and there have been charges of selling data in real time,
Hmm.
your location, all kinds of things. But when they're breached, this gigantic trove goes to the dark web, and unlike a regulated industry, they don't even have to report.
No.
And so I think you've hit the nail on the head with that one. And I don't know how you get around having a bit more laws on that. But my big
Right.
thing is, like, what I've seen over the years of being involved in information security and regulation, which is in effect laws, we don't usually need more laws. We usually need to enforce the ones that are there, because we do not do a good job of enforcement. And just to give you an example of that briefly,
Well, there's
um,
thausands of examples, right? There
okay,
actually are, because
so
I think
this is going
I think that's well said because people don't really think about it that way. Because whenever something happens, they're like, "Well, we need to." Like, I mean, it's analogous in so many aspects of life. There's a big shooting, and so people in certain cities are like, "Well, we need more laws." I'm like, "You already have the most strict laws
gun laws
on the
there are. Yeah.
planet." Right?
Yeah.
Like, enforce them and then maybe it'll be okay, right? Like, it really boils down to enforcement.
It does. And this example is going to be one. I used to spend a good amount of time in Washington, D.C. I was not a lobbyist, but I did educate Congress people, senators, staff, legal liaisons, as well as enforcement agency. And this was at the time of Office for Civil Rights, Health and
Hmm.
Human Services, together with congressional work. And what I learned is that I would go meet with a senator or a congressperson or a legal liaison for them, and tell them that, listen, in the healthcare industry, for example, these kinds of organizations don't worry at all about, in this case, HIPAA, because there's no enforcement. And they
Right.
were always shocked and they were, I think, deeply disappointed on the lawmaking side. And then you would go over to the Office for Civil Rights side, and they really kind of had the attitude of, we're going to enforce what we want. We're going to kind of do what we want unless someone threatens funding. And it was the first time I realized that the lawmakers might have really good intention, but if the
And
administrative state doesn't
yes.
enforce it, that the
Right.
laws don't even matter. that was a huge revelation for me. And that's the nature of why I spent time in DC trying to bridge the gap between lawmakers and the enforcement agencies.
Well, I think that's a great distinction, because that cuts, it's non-political. Like, you're not saying it's this party doing this or this party, because it's not. It
It's
is
not.
it is just, it is the government function. And there are ways around that. They can tie in restrictions on funding. Should there not be enforcement? There's always ways to craft and edit and amend. And
So ultimately, to your point, David, what wind up happening in a positive note on this one is that they started tying Medicare funding
exactly,
to
I was
privacy
just
and
about to say
security
that
regs,
for
and it
for
worked.
HIPAA. Yeah.
It worked. You
Yes.
because they got control of the money, and like, you're not going to get money if you're found to be negligent in the area of
Right.
protecting the data, as well as the associated fraud, and it worked.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, I mean, here in the United States, it seems the financial industry clearly has been the leader on the forefront of bolstering cybersecurity and bolstering compliance as evidence of certain controls for cybersecurity overall. But and healthcare, you'd think, would be right up there. It's still slowly coming, right? It's not as and we see it in the data breach statistics, right? Yeah, I mean, you just see U.S. healthcare getting pummeled, and with attacks like ransomware, it's literally killing people. Like, it's
Yes.
literally causing physical harm. It's blurred the lines
Yes.
between digital harm and physical harm. And
Yeah.
I think people are starting to see that more and more now.
Yeah, I think that, just as human beings, my belief is we've come to undervalue human beings. I think that my opinion is every human being that could come into the world, we should be aligning ourselves and programs to maximize the potential of human beings. And when we lose a human being, that this is a loss. And I think that's it's probably very naive, but I think we need to restill that, beginning with our own selves and our children and our grandchildren, and ask that
Well, it's
lawmakers
constitutional
recognize
as well.
that.
I mean,
It's
that's
constitutional.
it's the foundation of the U.S.
Yes.
Constitution. And it's funny because, I mean, I was a political science nerd. I was an attorney, and I will tell you that our Constitution is almost identical to certain communist countries. It's in the execution of it.
That's
right?
a great point.
You know what I mean? Like, on paper, they're almost the same. But let me tell you, the execution is completely different. Right?
Yes.
Like, the way we created the entities, the checks and balances that we have in place. And what you're bringing up is we're lacking checks and balances in certain segments right now.
And transparency. Right. Like,
transparency. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
The light is the best disinfectant, like that's the saying, or, we know that bad deeds happen in the dark, and the light is the best disinfectant. And when we see government officials of any persuasion, party, whatever, and they're pushing back on why we don't need to know, and, oh no, it's too scary for the public to know. Like, no.
Oh my God, all they have to do is watch the news. Like, they've seen everything at this point.
Yes.
Right. I mean,
yes.
And I think it underestimates the public in general.
Yes.
Right. Like, trust in your people a little bit more. And
absolutely. And that's exactly right. So I know it's a little different conversation, David, but this is where my head's been. I appreciate you.
No, it's
you
always
letting me explore these things a little bit
with you. And this is so interesting. So let's talk about some things that people can do. So from a personal privacy standpoint, what are some of the top 3 to 5 best practices that an individual can do? And the reason I'm focusing on the individual is organizations benefit when individuals take their privacy more seriously and have better cyber hygiene. Because when we create those best practices for ourselves, we bring those to work.
All right, I'm not going to say password management first.
So
I won't do that. I'm going to purposefully go a different direction.
So let me give you a little story. I just presented at a large manufacturer last week in front of, it was almost close to a couple thousand people live, and I
Yes.
thought it was going to be like 50, and there was like
Yes.
several thousand, and I was like, whoa, it was exciting, it was exhilarating. But I'll tell you, when we're talking about password management, I'm like, they've like people's eyes roll over when we talk about
Yes.
passwords again. It's like when you talk about spotting a phishing email, everyone's like, oh, we know. I'm like, do you? Do you really? Like, it's still
No,
like 80%
it
of
is.
all of the incidents are involved there. Like, we don't know, right?
They don't know. Right.
No.
And they get, so I would, here's one that you don't hear as much that I think is a good one, and I have friends doing it. We all know that social media is important in people's lives, and to say, well, stay
Mm-hmm.
off social media is very naive. But you know what you can do is you can at least not put the apps on your phone, and you can just leave your social media activity to like your desktop, your laptop. And so that can eliminate a
That's an
lot.
interesting point. Now, what's the benefit to that?
Well, if they're, you're getting tracked. I'm using a
Mm-hmm.
VPN today
Mm-hmm.
on my desktop. So on my phone, when I use a VPN, it messes up too much.
It
Like in other,
does. It slows
so I
everything
took the
down.
darn
Right.
thing off. You did the same thing, David?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. It slows everything up.
It slows it down. It breaks the apps, and you're
Mm-hmm.
like blaming the app, and they're like, no, it's my VPN on my phone. So in
Right.
any case, I can have the VPN on my desktop,
Yeah, that's a good
and
point.
I have an Instagram account and I have an X account. I don't have a Facebook account. I have LinkedIn, and I
Yep.
can go on my desktop when it's at my house. And if they track me, if they are able to get through the VPN and still correlate me to an identity, well, they're going to
It's
find
still
out that I'm
fine because
still
you're at work or
boringly
you're
at
at
my
home. Right.
house.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so, and then like, at least I'm not carrying this device around with me that's tracking every last interaction all the way
Well,
down
that's
to
an
I went to
interesting
the
best practice.
doctor, and
Yeah,
now they're
that's
going to
interesting.
market me
Right.
products related to like I just went to an eye doctor, for example.
Oh yeah. So then all of
And
a
so now
sudden
they're
you
going to
start
track.
seeing ads for
Yes.
yeah, all the time. Right.
Yeah. And then, I mean, it brings a sense of safety, at least a
Mm-hmm.
sense of physical safety, and maybe the
Yep.
reduction of a good deal of unwanted ads and all the byproducts
Mm-hmm.
that come with it. So that's one. We talked about the VPN. I do that on my desktop. We talked about password management.
Mm-hmm.
And the next kind of two or three are going to be exactly what we constructed Bunker to do, is reduce the attack surfaces. Because if you can reduce the attack surfaces, it just leaves the bad guys going on to the next target. So passwords, and
Yep.
I think secure document storage. When you've got your most important documents spread out all over the place, they're on your phone, they're on your iPad, they're on your desktop, they're in Dropbox, they're in Google Cloud, they're in Apple Cloud, Google Cloud. I mean, that's increasing the attack surfaces. So for
Right.
myself, I've reduced my attack surfaces by putting my most important documents all, into Bunker, where I know they're going to be with or without internet connectivity, and I don't have to
Mm-hmm.
store them in 18 different places. And then I think secure communications is a really big deal. I think that it's impossible not to observe every ransomware, or every major loss. There's probably a 80% chance it started with email.
Right.
So and that always goes to like an imposter. On the other end of the email
Mm-hmm.
is an imposter, and I use Bunker exclusively for any kind of mission critical communications I have. It's our own product. I 100% trust it and believe we eliminate those risks. So those are some that come to my mind. And then
Absolutely.
now we got to worry about the deep fakes, and the not just voice fakes but the video fakes, and
I'm
you have
telling
to.
you, that was how we began the education summit last week before that manufacturing group. It was all, I mean, we just started on deepfakes, and we showed them so many examples because I said, I can explain this, but you're not going to believe me. So let me show you. And I
Yes.
just showed them samples of it, and it was undetectable from the human eye. And not only that, deepfakes have gotten to the point where it's used live.
Yes.
Like
It was
it's
at
not
Hong
just a
Kong.
pre-done. Yeah.
Was it 25 million? It was a big slug of money they got out of it.
7 different
Yeah.
transactions totaling 25 million. And what happened was it started with an email. It was business email compromise. They said, no, we're not going to do this. I don't know anything about this. And they said, okay, no worries. Let's all get on a Zoom or a Teams and live. There were 7 other people live speaking with the person in accounts payable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the target, and they were able to ask questions for like 25-30 minutes. All 7 people were live deep fakes.
Yes.
It was, and they said I couldn't tell. Like they said, everything was accurate. Nothing was glitching. It was just like if I was speaking to 7 people at my company.
Yes.
It's really shocking.
Now for individuals, the family password is, you've probably heard that. I'm sure your other guests have said create a family password. For businesses, there's all kinds of ways you can avoid that.
Mm-hmm.
But part of it is what you already alluded to. And I've run businesses where we have a lot of employees, and security awareness. You need to invest in security awareness, and you can do that till you're blue in the face, and there's still people who just aren't going to remember to, hey, maybe I should pick up the phone and call this person on the known cell phone for them. They're still not going to take those actions. So I think businesses still probably have a challenge. I still think a lot of it revolves around email.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Kurt, thank you so much. What a fantastic conversation, my friend.
Well, I hope I didn't go too far, but David, I've really,
it was great.
I want to be more, I've watched all this happen, and I know I'm filibustering slightly, but bear with me 1 second. Of all the things I've read and seen of authoritarian regimes that get created around the world over all time periods, is they always ask people to live with lies. They ask that it's almost like by the end, I'm lying, and I know I'm lying, but I'm still going to lie to you, and you're going to go along with it.
Right.
And as a society, the very best thing that we can do is to tell the truth, stay open-minded, stay civil discourse, and assign a value to the truth, and try to get to the truth as a society, individually, in conversation. And that's what make that UF commitment important to us.
Well, and congratulations on that. And I think that's remarkable. We will definitely speak with you again so we can find out how that goes, because I think creating a safe place for open discourse is how we solve this, right? This is how, it used to be. I'm a student of history, so I look at the Lincoln Douglas debates, right? And things like that. Mm-hmm. Talk about heated life and death, like absolute diametric opposition of those two sides. And they were able to both just have open discourse and let the people vote. And it was the way, and the results removed slavery, right? And that was the result. But it was open discourse. It's just remarkable. So thank you so much, my friend. We will we will talk again, sir. Okay. Talk again soon. Kurt Long, everybody, CEO and founder of Bunker. There will be links in the show notes, and we thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, it's bunker.life is the website. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that wraps this up. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed our episode. The next one is coming right up. We appreciate you making this an award-winning podcast and downloading on Apple and Spotify and subscribing to our YouTube channel. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and we thank you for watching.